What if I told you that Jesus, nearly 2,000 years ago, gave his closest disciples a single question, not a prayer, not a commandment, a question so precise, so spiritually surgical, that it could cut right through the mask of anyone standing in front of you and reveal whether they were operating from divine light or from something far darker. Right now, in the comment box below, type the words, "I am awake," because what you're about to discover in this video is not taught in any church, any seminary, or any mainstream spiritual circle. And the ones who don't want you to know this, they've been working very hard to make sure it stays buried. And if this kind of hidden wisdom speaks to your soul, hit that like button right now, because every time you do, you're sending a signal to the universe that truth matters more than comfort. Here is something that has haunted mystics, Gnostic scholars, and spiritual seekers for centuries. In the ancient world, there existed a belief, whispered in secret gatherings, written in hidden gospels, passed down through initiates, that not everyone who appears to be guiding you is actually for you. Some were called Archons. The word itself sounds like something from a science fiction story, but to the early Gnostics, to the students who sat closest to Jesus, and to the writers of texts that were deliberately excluded from the Bible, Archons were terrifyingly real. They weren't monsters with horns. They were far more dangerous than that. They looked like teachers, leaders, authorities, people with answers, people with power, people who smiled while they kept your soul in a cage. And here is the question that changes everything tonight. How do you tell the difference? How do you know, in a world full of spiritual teachers, political leaders, religious figures, and even the people closest to you, who is genuinely operating from divine love, and who is an instrument of control, confusion, and spiritual imprisonment? Jesus knew. And according to ancient Gnostic texts that Rome tried desperately to destroy, he taught his disciples exactly how to know. In this video, we are going to go deep. We are going to uncover the historical and philosophical roots of the Archon teaching. We are going to reveal the one question Jesus gave as a spiritual litmus test. A test so simple a child could ask it, yet so profound that even the most sophisticated manipulator cannot escape it. And we are going to show you how to use this question in your own life, today, right now, in a world that may need it more than any other time in human history. Stay with me. Do not look away, because what comes next might just be the most important thing you've heard in a very long time. To understand the question Jesus taught, we first have to travel back, far back, to a time when spirituality was not a Sunday morning ritual, but a matter of cosmic survival. It is the 2nd century. The Roman Empire stretches across the known world like an iron shadow, and scattered throughout Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor, small groups of people meet in secret. They do not call themselves Christians in the way that word would later be defined. They call themselves Gnostics, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning direct inner knowing. Not belief, not faith in someone else's authority, but personal, lived, unshakable knowledge of divine truth. These people possessed texts, extraordinary texts, texts that recorded teachings of Jesus that never made it into what we now call the Bible. And in 325 AD, when Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, when powerful men sat in a room and decided which words of Jesus the world would be allowed to read, these texts were declared heresy. Communities were destroyed. Libraries were burned. And the knowledge went underground. But knowledge, true knowledge, has a way of surviving. In 1945, a farmer in Upper Egypt named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging near the cliffs of Jabal al-Taref. His shovel struck something hard beneath the earth. He pulled out a sealed clay jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices, papyrus pages covered in ancient Coptic text. This discovery would shake the world of biblical scholarship to its foundations. It was called the Nag Hammadi Library, and it contained the very teachings Rome had tried to erase. Among those texts was the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John. And within their pages lived the full, terrifying, magnificent teaching of the Archons. So what exactly were Archons? The Gnostic cosmology, their understanding of how reality is structured, was profoundly different from mainstream Christianity. They taught that the physical world we inhabit wasn't created by the highest, most loving God. It was created by a lesser divine being, a kind of cosmic craftsman they called the demiurge, a Greek word meaning public craftsman or half-maker. This being was not evil in a cartoonish sense, but it was limited, arrogant. It believed itself to be the supreme creator when in fact it was merely a shadow of something infinitely greater. And the demiurge did not work alone. It had administrators, enforcers, a hierarchy of spiritual powers whose entire function was to maintain the structure of the material world and to keep human souls locked within it. These were the Archons. The word in Greek literally means rulers or authorities. And the Gnostics believed they operated not just in the cosmic realm, but through human beings, through systems, through institutions, through any person or structure whose primary function was control over the awakening of others. Now here is where it becomes deeply personal. The Gnostics were not describing monsters from another dimension, though they used cosmic language to explain it. They were describing a pattern, a recurring spiritual phenomenon that Jesus himself had clearly identified and warned his disciples about. A pattern of false authority, of spiritual gatekeeping, of leaders and teachers who, consciously or unconsciously, positioned themselves between a human soul and its direct experience of divine truth. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Nag Hammadi texts, Jesus says something extraordinary. He says, "The kingdom is inside of you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known." This was a radical statement, because it meant that no intermediary was required, no priest, no king, no ruler, no archon. And that was the most dangerous idea in the ancient world, because if people truly believed they had direct access to the divine, then every system built on managing that access would crumble. So the Archons, whether understood as cosmic beings or as the pattern of control they represent, had everything to lose. And the question Jesus taught his disciples was designed to expose them, every single time. Now we arrive at the heart of it, the moment you've been waiting for. But I need you to understand something before I reveal this question, because if you approach it casually, you will miss its power entirely. This question is not a trap. It is not a trick. It is not a clever debate technique designed to make someone look foolish. It is something far more profound than that. It is a spiritual mirror. And what it reflects cannot be faked. In the ancient Gnostic texts, particularly in the Apocryphon of John, there is a passage that describes how archonic forces operate. It says they work through imitation. They take what is real, what is divine, what is luminous, and they create a copy, a convincing replica, something that looks like light, but produces no warmth, something that sounds like wisdom, but leaves you more dependent, more confused, more spiritually imprisoned than before you found it. Think about that for a moment. Imagine you are lost in a vast, dark forest. You are exhausted, you are afraid, and suddenly through the trees, you see a light, your heart leaps, you run toward it. But as you get closer, something feels wrong. The light is there, it is real. But standing next to it is someone who says, "You cannot approach this light without me. You need my permission, you need my interpretation, you need my blessing before the light will recognize you." That is the Archonic pattern. And Jesus saw it everywhere he looked. In the Pharisees who had turned the living law of Moses into an instrument of shame and control. In the Roman authorities who used divine mandate to justify domination. In any teacher, in any era, who placed themselves as a permanent, indispensable wall between a human soul and its own divine nature. So what was the question? In the Gospel of Thomas, saying 100, and echoed in a more hidden form in several Gnostic dialogues, Jesus engages his disciples in a moment that scholars have long debated, but mystics have always understood. A disciple asks him, "How shall we know who speaks truth and who speaks from the lower powers?" And Jesus gives an answer so simple it sounds almost too plain. He says essentially this: ask them where they want your power to go. Let me say that again, because those words deserve space. Ask them where they want your power to go. Not what do they believe, not which scripture do they quote, not how many miracles have they performed, or how many followers do they have. But when all is said and done, where does your energy, your devotion, your surrender, your spiritual power end up? Does it flow back to you, refined, clarified, amplified, returned to you as greater self-knowledge and inner freedom? Or does it flow toward them, toward their institution, their authority, their system, their ego, leaving you emptier, smaller, and more dependent than when you began? This is the question. And it is devastating in its precision. Because here is what makes it so extraordinary as a spiritual diagnostic tool. A genuinely divine teacher, a genuinely awakened soul, someone operating from true gnosis and authentic love, has no need for your power. They are already full. They are already connected to the infinite source. What they want for you is your liberation, your expansion, your direct, unmediated experience of the divine. But an Archon, whether it is a cosmic force, a human personality, or an institutional system, feeds on directed devotion. It requires your surrender not as a gateway to freedom, but as a destination. Your submission is not a phase in your awakening. It is the product being harvested. The mystic and scholar Elaine Pagels, who spent decades studying the Nag Hammadi texts, wrote that the early Gnostics were profoundly suspicious of any spiritual authority that demanded obedience in place of inner knowing. They believed that the mark of a true teacher was that they consistently pointed away from themselves and toward the student's own divine spark, what the Gnostics called the pneuma, the breath of true spirit living inside every human soul. Now think about the teachers, the leaders, the figures of authority in your own life. Think about the spiritual systems you have moved through. Think about the relationships that shaped your understanding of your own worth and your own access to truth. And ask yourself, honestly, quietly, in the sacred space of your own awareness, where did my power go? Did you leave those experiences more whole, more free, more trusting of your own inner voice? Or did you leave smaller, more doubtful of yourself, more convinced that you needed them, their approval, their validation, their continued presence, to access something real? That feeling you just had reading those questions, that recognition moving through your chest right now, that is your pneuma. That is the divine spark the Archons have always tried to dim, and it is very much alive inside you. Now I want to take you deeper, because understanding the question is one thing, but truly seeing how the archonic pattern operates in the world around you, in ways you may never have noticed before, that is where this teaching transforms from fascinating information into genuine spiritual armor. Let us talk about the mechanism, the how of it all. The Gnostic texts describe Archons as masters of something they called haimarmene, a Greek word that translates roughly as fate or destiny enforced from outside. The idea was this: Archons do not primarily operate through obvious force. They are far too sophisticated for that. They operate through narrative. Through the stories they convince you to believe about yourself, about reality, about what is possible, and most critically, about what you deserve. Think of it like an invisible architecture, a structure built not from stone and iron, but from beliefs, from assumptions so deeply embedded in your consciousness that you never think to question them because they don't feel like beliefs at all. They feel like facts. They feel like the way things simply are. You are a sinner who requires saving. You are too small to understand the mysteries yourself. You need an intermediary. You need an institution. You need someone else's permission to be whole. That is haimarmene. That is the archonic cage. And the terrifying genius of it is that most people locked inside it are holding the key in their own hand and don't know it. Now here is something that the mainstream spiritual conversation almost never addresses, something that makes the Gnostic teaching feel almost uncomfortably modern. The archonic pattern does not only operate in overtly religious systems, it operates anywhere that a structure, a person, an ideology, an institution, positions itself as the sole legitimate gateway to something your soul genuinely needs. Truth, safety, belonging, salvation, enlightenment, love, worthiness. Look at the political leader who says, "Only I can fix this. Without me, you are lost." Look at the social media algorithm that keeps you scrolling in a state of low-grade anxiety, never quite satisfied, always needing one more piece of content to feel informed or validated. Look at the wellness guru who gives you just enough transformation to keep you coming back, but never quite the tools to make them unnecessary. Look at the relationship, intimate, familial, professional, where one person's sense of power depends entirely on the other person's continuing self-doubt. The face changes. The mechanism is always the same. And this is precisely why the question Jesus taught is so timeless, so universal, so applicable to every century, every culture, every context. Because the archonic pattern is not bound to any one religion or political system or historical era. It is a recurring feature of the human experience of power. And the question, "Where does your power go?" cuts through every disguise it wears. But now I want to address something important, something that adds a profound layer of nuance to this teaching, because there is a version of this idea that can be misused, and a truly awakened person needs to understand the difference. Not every authority figure is an archon. Not every teacher who asks for your trust is harvesting your power. Not every system that has structure and hierarchy is a cage. Jesus himself, in the very same Gnostic texts that contain this teaching, accepted disciples, taught them, asked them to follow. The difference was not in the presence of authority. The difference was in its orientation. A true teacher uses their authority like a ladder. They allow you to climb. They stabilize the structure. They point upward. And when you reach the height they can offer, they celebrate that you no longer need the ladder. They want you to fly. An archonic authority uses its power like a treadmill. It keeps you moving. It gives you the feeling of progress. It rewards your effort with just enough result to maintain your engagement. But you never actually arrive anywhere. You never actually graduate. You never actually become so free and so whole that you walk away no longer needing what they offer. The Gnostic Gospel of Philip puts it in language that sends chills down the spine of anyone who truly reads it. It says, "A blind person and one who can see are not both in the dark. When the light comes, one who can see will see the light. One who is blind will stay in the dark." The Archon, you see, needs the darkness to persist, because in the light, in the full radiance of a soul that has discovered its own divine nature, the Archon's authority dissolves completely. It has nothing left to offer, nothing left to withhold, nothing left to sell. And here is perhaps the most stunning part of this entire teaching, the part that the Gnostics whispered to each other in those secret gatherings, the part that made Rome so desperate to silence them. The Archon is not ultimately your enemy. I know that sounds shocking. Stay with me. In the deeper Gnostic framework, the Archons serve an involuntary purpose. They are, in a cosmic sense, pressure. They are the resistance that forces the pneuma, the divine spark, to grow stronger, to become more self-aware, to push back against the cage until it discovers that the bars were never as solid as they appeared. Every spiritual tradition in human history has a version of this idea. The Hindu concept of Maya, the illusion that must be seen through. The Buddhist teaching on dukkha, the dissatisfaction that drives awakening. The alchemical principle that gold is only revealed through fire. The Archon, in the end, is the fire, and the question Jesus taught is the moment you realize you are the gold. Everything we have explored so far, the ancient texts, the cosmic architecture of the Archons, the question Jesus taught, none of it means anything unless it changes something in the way you live, in the way you see, in the way you move through the world and through the relationships and systems that shape your daily experience. So let us make this real. Let us bring this ancient wisdom down from the mountain and into the moment you are living right now. The first practice is what I call the power audit. It is simple. It requires no special tools, no ritual, no teacher's permission. All it requires is honesty, and honesty, as the Gnostics knew, is itself a form of divine courage. Take a quiet moment, tonight if possible. Sit with a journal, or simply sit with yourself in stillness. And bring to mind the 5 most significant sources of authority in your life right now. These might be spiritual teachers, religious institutions, political figures, media sources, relationships, employers, or ideological communities. Write them down. And next to each one, ask the question Jesus taught. Where does my power go here? Not where does it feel like it goes, not where are you told it goes, but where does it actually go? When you engage with this person, this system, this community, do you walk away more trusting of your own inner knowing? Do you leave with greater clarity, greater freedom, greater confidence in your own direct connection to truth? Or do you leave more doubtful, more dependent, more convinced that without this source you would be spiritually lost? Be ruthlessly gentle with yourself here. This is not about blame. This is not about declaring anyone a villain. It is simply about seeing clearly. And seeing clearly is the first and most essential act of spiritual liberation. The second practice is what the early Gnostics themselves used. It was called the discernment of spirits, and it operates through the body rather than the mind. Here is how you use it. The next time you are in the presence of a teacher, a leader, or any figure of authority making claims on your spiritual energy or your surrender, close your eyes for just a moment and check in with your physical body. Not your thoughts, not your analysis, your body. Does your chest feel open or constricted? Does your breath deepen or become shallow? Does something in your belly feel settled and grounded? Or does it feel like a subtle, persistent alarm that your mind keeps explaining away? The Gnostics believed, and modern neuroscience is quietly beginning to agree, that the body carries a form of knowing that precedes rational thought. They called it the epinoia, a divine intuitive flash, a sudden inner recognition of truth that bypasses the intellectual filters that archonic systems are very skilled at manipulating. Your mind can be argued with. Your mind can be confused, flattered, shamed, and gradually restructured by a sophisticated enough system of control. But that deep bodily knowing, that quiet alarm or that quiet peace, is extraordinarily difficult to fake. Learn to trust it. Practice listening to it in low-stakes situations first. Notice how it speaks. Notice its language. And gradually, as you develop this relationship with your own inner discernment, you will find that the question Jesus taught becomes not something you have to consciously ask, but something you simply know the answer to the moment you walk into a room. The third practice is perhaps the most powerful of all, and the most challenging. It is the practice of returning power to yourself. Because here is the difficult truth that this teaching ultimately confronts us with. The reason archonic systems have power over us is not simply because they are clever or forceful. It is because somewhere along the way, we gave them our power, not through stupidity, not through weakness, but through a very human hunger for certainty, for belonging, for someone to tell us that we are enough and that we are safe. That hunger is not a flaw, it is sacred. It is the pneuma reaching outward, searching for its source. But when we redirect that hunger toward a system that cannot truly feed it, when we pour our devotion into a vessel that was never designed to return it to us transformed, we create the very dependency the Archon requires. So the practice is this. Every day, in whatever way feels authentic to you, through meditation, through prayer, through time in nature, through creative expression, through simple conscious breathing, deliberately, intentionally direct your spiritual attention inward, not to a teacher's interpretation of what lives there, not to an institution's definition of what you will find, but to the direct, unmediated, raw experience of your own inner life. Sit with it, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is uncertain, even when the silence feels louder than any answer you were hoping for, because that discomfort, that willingness to sit with yourself without an intermediary, is precisely what the archonic pattern cannot survive. It requires your outsourcing. It requires your abdication. The moment you reclaim the throne of your own inner authority, the cage dissolves. And you will know it has dissolved not because someone tells you so, not because a text confirms it, not because a teacher validates it. You will know because you will feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the quiet, unshakable certainty of a soul that has finally remembered what it actually is. We have traveled far together in this video, from the secret gatherings of the ancient Gnostics to the buried libraries of Egypt, to the cosmic architecture of Archons, and the living, breathing pattern they represent in the world around us today. And through all of it, through every layer of history and philosophy and spiritual teaching, one simple, devastating, liberating question has been waiting at the center of it all. Where does your power go? That is what Jesus taught, not as a theological concept to be debated in academic halls, not as a doctrine to be memorized and recited, but as a living spiritual instrument. A key forged from pure discernment, designed to fit the lock of every cage the archonic pattern has ever built across every century of human experience. The Gnostics understood something that our modern world is only beginning to remember: that the most radical, the most dangerous, the most revolutionary act a human being can perform is to trust their own direct experience of the divine, to refuse the intermediary, to look past the impressive robes and the authoritative voices and the systems that promise salvation in exchange for surrender, and to say quietly, firmly, from the deepest place inside themselves, I already have access. I already carry the light. I do not need your permission to be whole. That recognition is not arrogance. It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is the pneuma, your divine spark, finally exhaling after a very long time of being held in. And here is what I want to leave you with tonight. Something that I believe with every part of my understanding of these ancient teachings. The fact that you are here, that this video found you, that these ideas resonated somewhere deep inside you, that you felt that quiet recognition moving through your chest at some point in these past few minutes. That is not an accident. That is not algorithm. That is your pneuma reaching toward truth the way a plant reaches toward sunlight, instinctively, inevitably, because it cannot do anything else. You were never as lost as the archonic pattern needed you to believe. So carry this question with you. Use it gently, but use it honestly. Apply it to the systems around you, to the authorities in your life, and, perhaps most importantly, apply it to yourself. Because the most subtle archon of all is the one we sometimes build inside our own minds, the internal voice that tells us we are not ready, not worthy, not spiritual enough to trust our own knowing. Ask it the question, where does my power go when I listen to you? And then listen, really listen, to what answers. If this teaching moved something in you today, share this video with someone whose pneuma you believe is ready to remember itself. Leave a comment below telling me which part of this teaching struck you most deeply. And if you haven't already, like this video, not for the algorithm but as a declaration, a small but real act of saying, yes, truth matters to me. Awakening matters to me. I am paying attention. The ancient ones kept this knowledge alive through centuries of persecution and fire and deliberate erasure. The least we can do is pass it forward. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and above all, keep trusting the light that was never not inside you.